when seated and when entering and leaving the room. I will call Kenny MacAskill to move the motion and then the Minister to respond. There will not be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up, as is the convention, for 30-minute debates. I call Kenny MacAskill to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Davis. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Connectivity is critical, if not king, in the 21st century. As coronavirus has shown, telecommunications are vital, allowing for home working and businesses to operate even during lockdowns. Zoom and Teams have come to the fore, even in this House, and have proven essential for many. But other more established and certainly physical methods of connectivity are equally vital. Road, rail and air have shown how essential they are in a globalised world and have been supported by governments both sides of the border even before coronavirus struck. Yet there's one major aspect of connectivity where Scotland's been left high and dry. That's in direct ferry links to mainland Europe. It's not just a long-standing issue, but a long-standing omission. It was a major gap even before coronavirus and Brexit impacted. They've simply compounded the existing need. Road freight has been hit hard through driver absence and customs nightmares, let alone additional bureaucracy. Trade, which could have gone swiftly and with ease from a safe Scottish harbour, has been struggling to access routes south, and even then, facing delays and backlogs at English ports. The spectre of arterial routes becoming truck parks as lorries backed up and loads rotted in the back would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic. At the same time, the cost of fuel has rocketed. Not only have there been challenges with fuel shortages, but profitability has reduced through having to trunker goods to ports a considerable distance south, whether the Tyne or Humber, or even far beyond to the Channel ports. The former are a considerable distance, but the latter, especially for seafood or other perishable items, were already an absurd journey, but one that has been made so much worse through additional delays and impediments. There's yet another compelling reason for investing in maritime links beyond the connectivity it provides. For despite COP26 taking place in Glasgow, little thought has been given to improving maritime links for their environmental benefit. There are issues with maritime fuel, and action to address that, whether in reducing the pollution from marine diesel or exploring alternative fuels such as batteries, is essential. However, it's still better for our environment to load freight aboard one ship than of dozens, if not hundreds, of lorries struggling down congested roads. Yet these risks, which were known to be looming on the horizon, as were these opportunities which would be beneficial economically, socially and environmentally. It's not as if many of these events weren't foreseeable, even for those who only foresaw sunny uplands for Brexit. Customs delays were always going to kick in, and other nations, such as Ireland, prepared. But shamefully, that wasn't done in Scotland by either the Scottish or UK governments. As a result, many businesses have paid a heavy price. Now, it's not as if Scotland lacks access to the seas or is devoid of ports. The nation has the facilities and historically has the links. Scotland was always linked by sea routes to Europe, and they continued, even when the major trade moved to the west coast and the Atlantic. Pantiles on the roofs of many homes in my East Lothian constituency testified to the links with the Low Countries. Along the shores of the Forth and the Port of Leith, where I was born, street names are equally redolent: Baltic, Cadiz and Hamburg, though the name was changed to Hamborough during the First World War. More recently, the superfast service, which sailed from Rosyth to Zeebrugge and was enjoyed by many, benefiting both trade and tourism. That port and the facilities constructed for the Ro-Ro services still exists. Despite the valiant efforts of the Honourable Member for Dunfermline West, it's currently serving as a safe harbour for berthed cruise ships with the Ro-Ro infrastructure moribund, rather than providing a major link for Scottish trade and tourism. Other options exist, whether in existing harbours or in the potential for a new port at Cockenzie in my own constituency. So the historic links remain, and the infrastructure remains. So why has there been no progress in launching routes, both over past years when they'd have been welcomed, or now when they're essential? It's not as if the maritime sector globally, let alone in Europe, has been idle. Other nations have acted, and so must Scotland. Ireland, seeing the problems that Brexit would bring, prepared, adding significantly to services already operating. By all means.
Thank you very much. The member mentioned, honourable member mentioned about exports and trade. Is it not a time, in his view, that we should have a substantial maritime support policy from the UK government to actually support trade post-Brexit, as they have done in not only in Ireland, as he outlined, but also on the Low Countries that you also mentioned earlier, where they have a direct support package to increase trade post-Brexit?
Well, I do. I think that's something that should be done by the UK government, but it'll go on to say transport, and certainly maritime transport, is largely devolved, and that's why my demands are not simply towards the UK government, but towards the Scottish government. Because as I was saying with regard to Ireland, despite distance and sail times being longer, Ireland ensured alternatives to the land bridge that was the previous favoured route for many. That meant sailing to a port in Scotland, Wales or England, then journeying on via the UK motorway network to the Channel ports. Not for them a Boris Bridge or any other delusional nonsense. Instead, they arranged to sail direct to Europe. Direct freight routes were expanded and passenger services increased, thus avoiding customs backlogs, reducing road journeys, avoiding the difficulties of driver absences through illness or self-isolation, and making environmental gains. In Ireland, 3 main operators now offer passenger services. Brittany Ferries, Irish Ferries and Stena Line offer services, some sailing up to 5 times per week from Cork, Dublin and Rosslare, and heading to Roscoff, Bilbao and Cherbourg, ensuring access to their principal markets and allowing for inbound as well as outbound tourism. They're not the only routes available across the Irish Sea to access Europe. Other services provide for freight only, whether for vehicles with haulage or unaccompanied freight. Since Brexit, services and routes increased, allowing further options and avoiding the problems that have arisen, especially at the Channel ports. Scotland and Ireland have similar-sized populations, and both are dependent upon trade and tourism. For both countries, Europe is a big and major market. In several instances, Ireland is a direct competitor. Yet Irish maritime links are growing almost exponentially, and Scotland remains tied up in port with increasing paperwork. But it's not just Ireland that has been acting to increase maritime links. Countries across Europe have been taking action to address the challenges they faced, even if not the Brexit-imposed customs debacle, allowing for new opportunities for trade and tourism. Many have accessed funding from the EU, but all have been financially assisted by government to develop. A tender has been issued to re-establish a ferry link between Greece and Cyprus. Support funding of €5.5 million being provided for a 3-year service with the possibility of an extension beyond. Other nations have acted similarly. Stockholm in Sweden to Rostock, Germany, is to begin this spring. Yes, it's having a state subsidy, but it's saving on CO2 and other costs. And it's not just in the Baltic, but the North Sea, as a Norway to Netherlands service is to commence in April. So why are we devoid of action in Scotland? Transport's largely devolved, and therefore much of the failure to date, and indeed action that needs to be taken, rests with the Scottish Government. They have failed to show any sign of urgency, let alone shown any sign of ambition for the country. Instead, they've remained throttled to a free market dogma that you expect from London, but could and should be rejected by an administration with Scotland's interests at heart. A 4 nations approach may have merit in aspects of health policy. But with ferries, it's an approach that leaves Scotland isolated, sucking everything into the ports in England and leaving Scotland marooned.
Will you give way?
By all means.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. And I wonder, does he share my deep regret that a comparative drop in the ocean of investment would be sufficient to move this project forward, and the reluctance of the Scottish Government to do so undermines Scotland's case for independence and undermines the valiant work and efforts of the honourable member for Dunfermline and West Fife?
Absolutely. I commend the efforts of the member for Dunfermline West and indeed share your point that it's a very modest investment, as I'll go on to say, but one that would have significant returns. However, the UK government cannot absolve itself of blame, whether in its free market dogma that has privatised critical infrastructure such as ports, but which is a debate for another day, more importantly, who promised to match or exceed former benefits of EU membership that once applied. But Motorway of the Sea funding, a scheme once available due to EU membership and created for the purpose of establishing maritime links between nations, hasn't been replaced by any scheme, yet alone by a better one. Both the UK Government and the Scottish Government claim they support the establishment of new services, but they insist they must be market-driven. That is entirely self-funding and with no state support. A new venture is therefore expected to launch without any state ballast or even a lifeboat to ensure survival. Yet that doesn't apply in other modes of transportation. No one would dream of suggesting that a haulier required to provide the road network or that a rail freight operator should build a rail line. But that's state support, albeit in a different way. Expecting an operator to acquire ships and launch a service without any support is equally perverse. Why shouldn't assistance be given to start maritime links, matching support for road and rails and replicating what is standard in other countries? The M74 extension, the AWPR and upgrading the A9 are all about improving Scottish connectivity and are not left to the haulage sector. Scotland rightly lauded new rail links that were opened, such as Stirling-Alloa and Airdrie-Bathgate, both of which have proven spectacularly successful. Support is being given to reopening new stations, with East Linton and Reston to come. Even aviation has seen support, with bailouts given to keep airlines alive and a route development fund once provided, as I'll expand on. So why the preclusion of maritime links? The UK government dogma of being market-driven, and which neither applies in other transport nodes nor is echoed in other lands, might be expected from a Tory government, but has shamefully been mirrored by the Scottish Government. Communications from the Scottish Transport Minister have parroted the UK line and ignored the steps that other small and even competitor nations have taken, such as Ireland and Norway. As a result, Scotland is losing out. Two matters make that position particularly perverse. First, Scotland routinely funds ferry services. Considerable financial support is rightly given to backing both Caledonian McBrain and Northlink ferries. With CalMac, it's upwards of £120 million per annum, and there's even more provided for boats and piers. Orkney-Shetland services receive approximately £45 million per year in support. No one would question that. It's essential, as they are lifeline services, and neither roads nor railways can be provided. It's a sensible provision of public funds. Why is it legitimate and sensible to support internal maritime links, but refuse to do so for external ones? Why should a government argue that an island nation which requires to trade with Europe and encourage European visitors should not support maritime services? Why can they not be supported when, as my honourable colleague has already said in his intervention, when only a fraction of the funds already spent on maritime support would be required, and yet the economic returns would be considerable? Secondly, Scotland previously operated a route development fund to establish direct air links. That was seen as essential in growing trade and inbound tourism, as well as, despite the environmental impact of aviation, avoiding an additional flight almost invariably to a London airport. That was supported by all major parties and applied until EU regulations brought it to a halt in 2007. EU regulations no longer apply. So why no Brexit bonus? In any event, as with Motorway of the Seas funding, both the EU and nations such as Ireland and Norway now see the benefit of state support for vital connectivity. That and reducing carbon emissions by reducing road freight and growing unaccompanied trailer use. Scotland is losing out in competitiveness and convenience to Ireland and other nations. Scottish trade and tourism are suffering, and promises from COP26 ring hollow. Demands on the public purse are many and resource is limited, especially post-COVID. But funds are still able to be found by the UK government for HS2, even in a truncated form, and which will come nowhere near Scotland. Millions were also wasted in seeking to reopen a channel port when ports were available in Scotland and only the ferry service was lacking. That attitude might be expected from a Tory government thorough to a market-driven dogma and oblivious to Scottish needs, but it's entirely inexplicable for an administration that claims to have Scottish interests at heart. What does it say when the administration of Lord McConnell of Grenscorridale was more radical in providing air routes for Scotland than Nicola Sturgeon's is with maritime links? Scotland deserves better. It requires connectivity in all forms of transport, as in telecoms. It needs ferry services to Europe. Will the Minister commit to funding an equivalent to the EU Motorway of the Seas scheme and applicable for all parts of the UK, including Scotland? And finally, the Scottish Government must establish a ferry service route development fund to launch and sustain them. Scotland deserves no less. I move the motion.
This House has considered direct ferry links between Scotland and mainland Europe. Minister.
Thank you, Mr Davis, and as ever it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And may I start, as is customary, by congratulating the Honourable Member for East Lothian for securing the debate and for making his case so passionately, and also to the Honourable Members for Dunfermline, West Fife and Kirkcaldy for their considered interventions. The UK Government fully recognise that quality transport links are essential to economic growth, job creation, social cohesion and many other areas. And we are committed to progress our work on increasing connectivity throughout the entire UK and beyond. I'll come on to some of the specifics that the Honourable Member mentioned, but I think I must correct some of the impression that he has made that there is no interest or investment in improving connectivity throughout these isles. Firstly, specifically on maritime, there is investment going in to Scotland as we speak in improving port facilities. If he looks across to the other side of Scotland from where he represents, at Greenock, there is considerable investment going in to the ocean terminal there, specifically to boost the tourist offer. And there, leaving aside the disruption caused by COVID, the demand there is increasing enormously. So there is investment going in. And more generally, he will be aware that the government has commissioned, and it's recently reported, the Union Connectivity Review, which is specifically about looking at the key transport links by all modes, whether that's rail, road, air or maritime, right across the UK and beyond, to complement the European, what's called the 10T, Trans-European Strategic Networks. And those are looking at transport corridors in the whole. It might be that to improve connectivity or capacity between 2 points, the right intervention might be somewhere else. So, for example, he referred to HS2. It will benefit Scotland, and it will significantly reduce journey times by rail from between Glasgow and Edinburgh to London. Yes, of course I'll give way.
Even in Northern Ireland, much freight is now heading south to the Republic to take direct ferry access to Europe rather than following the Land Bridge, and accordingly, even in Cairnryan, Scotland is losing out.
Well, I'm very happy to respond to that. If he reads the Union Connectivity Review, and Mr Davis, is a mark of considerable regret that the Scottish Government, on pure dogma, refused to engage in this review. A central recommendation of the Connectivity Review was to improve the A75 from Cairnryan to the main motorway network, which is one of the key impediments to freight and other traffic between the UK and Northern Ireland. So yes, we are aware of this and we're taking steps to improve it. And just to complete my point on HS2, another recommendation of the Connectivity Review was to improve the connectivity between the HS2 line and the West Coast Main Line, upgrade the West Coast Main Line so that you achieve a Glasgow and Edinburgh to London journey time that will be much more advantageous to travel by rail than by air, improving the environment. Yes, of course I'll give way.
The Minister seems to be being sidetracked onto rail. I think it's important to stick to the maritime issues that we've got here. We've seen massive investment as part of the Levelling Up agenda that his government supports in terms of Tilbury, Teesside and, as my honourable friend mentioned before, the Channel ports. So why are we not getting and seeing the same level of investment in maritime in Scotland? Because Brexit has had a huge impact on Scottish exports and we need to remedy that, and it's up to the Minister to actually bring forward proposals that will actually help support Scottish exports as we move forward.
The honourable gentleman makes a perfectly fair point, and I will be coming on in the next 8 minutes to some of the specifics of maritime. But I think it was only right for me to point out that this impression that the government's not interested in connectivity in all its forms is just simply not true. I'll give way one last time to the honourable member, and then I must make progress, or I won't get round to the maritime.
We're giving way. He's been a good sport. On the point of HS2 and the benefits that may deliver at some distant point in the future, dependent on the project's development and links, as he has mentioned. If we're trying to achieve a comprehensive transport strategy, does he not think that it would be a very useful investment, a small investment in comparison to the massive investment of HS2, to support the development of connectivity, maritime connectivity, as part of that comprehensive transport link? And would he commit to meet with myself and my honourable friend at some point in the future to discuss maritime strategy in more detail? Minister.
Well, indeed, when I refer to the Union Connectivity, that is across all modes of transport. I don't think there's one single intervention that's important. And of course, I'm always happy to meet him and his colleagues. And I know the Honourable Member for Dunfermline and West Fife has been in to see the Secretary of State for Scotland to discuss the specifics of the Rosyth to Zeebrugge route. Let me make some progress on this. I do understand that the proposed ferry link would replace a service that previously was run by DFDS Seaways from Rosyth to Zeebrugge. That started as a combined passenger and freight service in 2002. Excuse me, and was changed to freight only in 2010 due to insufficient demand. And even after cost-saving measures were taken out by the operator by changing to freight only and double stacking the containers, the route continued to make losses, and a fire on board sealed the fate of the service in 2018. And I do understand the opportunities that could be presented by such a direct ferry link, encouraging passengers to use fewer short-haul flights, and diversifying the connectivity. I think, leaving aside all the other arguments about Brexit, and I'm sure we could have a fascinating debate about that, it is surely a truism that it is better to have more diversity in your transport links. So if one is constrained by whatever reason, weather, industrial action on the continent, whatever it is, that you have alternatives to use. And indeed, there are services from Zeebrugge to the UK. There's, I think, a daily service at least from Zeebrugge to Hull. What I cannot do today is commit to any one specific route. That has to be a commercial matter. In terms of the infrastructure that's required, that is there at both ends. There wouldn't be required to be additional infrastructure at Zeebrugge or Rosyth. The one bit of additional resource that would be required, and this is not impossible, and I understand discussions have already happened, is to have the border force manpower at Rosyth to deal with passengers and freight coming in. So, those discussions can happen and could be put in place, but the request has to come from the operators who wish to establish such a service. And I would also put this discussion into the more broader context of changing international shipping patterns. I'm talking particularly about freight at the moment. The honourable member may not know, but I've spent 7 years serving on the Transport Select Committee, so this is a subject I've given some consideration to. And if you look at the scale and patterns of international shipping, particularly from the Far East to Europe, what is happening there is the vessels are becoming larger and larger, and whereas in the past they would come from the Far East and serve various European ports and then return, they now tend to come to one port, whether that's Felixstowe or Rotterdam. Yes, of course, I'll give way.
I think that was the case to have a regional ferry port servicing the likes of Zeebrugge, which is a major international port, or Antwerp, for example, because that's where the links are made. Containers are moved and lorry loads of goods are moved to these larger ports to be redistributed from there. And I can't, for the life of me, understand why the receiving port, in this case Zeebrugge, has access to a Brexit resilience fund where we in Scotland do not have a similar fund to go to. This is it just seems logical that if we're making a huge change in terms of Brexit to our trading patterns, why the government, why the UK government have not put something in place to actually help us deal with that.
Well, the honourable gentleman, he actually finished my point for me. By having those one stop in Europe, then you have to have additional feeder services to and from. Now, Felixstowe, Port of London are massively expanding their operation. Actually, a lot of the ferries are coming there. These are commercial matters. This isn't for a government to say, we want this route rather than that route. What we are doing is, as I say, through the connectivity review, looking at transport connectivity in the round. And I also want, I'm conscious of time, but I also want to point to the environmental aspect of this. And we do have a strategy, the Maritime 2050 strategy. The industry is making considerable advances in decarbonising its operations. And that is a UK government-funded scheme to help that transition and realise some of the ambitions from COP26 in Glasgow. And I do understand the tourism point as well. We do want to market, as hopefully international travel returns to normal levels in the near future, that could be an attractive destination and boost the visitor economy in Scotland and throughout the whole UK. As the honourable member for East Lothian said, it is primarily a matter for the Scottish Government on this specific route if they wish to develop it. My understanding is that the Scottish Government has said it needs to be on a commercial basis, but there is no objection from the UK government to seeing this sort of route reinstated. And I'm more than happy to have discussions with the honourable gentleman and his colleagues to see what way forward is. And as I say, the specifics that we are responsible for, like border force, that is not an impediment in itself. Clearly, there are lead times in recruitment and the other requirements for installing that service, but it's not a block on the project being taken forward. So I wish the honourable gentleman and his colleagues well in pursuing this ambition. I think it would be to the benefit of Scotland and the whole of the UK, and I'm very happy, as I say, to meet with them offline to discuss it further. Thank you very much.
Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 2:30.